Okay, we need a system. There's an innovation challenges, but how you get people to return from a room. My system at the moment, the main one, is you put underfloor heating under there, and you turn the heating up slowly, so it's getting hotter and hotter underfoot until people come back. That works very well with sandals. Unfortunately for our wheelchair users, it means your tires melt, but okay, we can get around this problem. Yeah, I could sing. That would empty this side of the room completely. Yes. Okay. Yeah. This is right. This is eating into your lunchtime. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce Jane, because I know that once she comes up to the stage, you'll come rushing back. Okay. This is going to be a very straightforward introduction. Because somebody's taken my notes away about you, Jane. They've gone. Okay, let me move us on. We're going to move on now to a case study, and one which is I think is really very interesting. We're going to look at accessible design and implementation, and specifically to look at the Eden project. Now, the Eden project is a fascinating project that was built around about the turn of the millennium to introduce concepts of environment, sustainability, and ecology. Many years ago, I went down to visit it, and it's moved on hugely from that. So in this session, I'm going to introduce Jane Stoneham, who's director of the Sensory Trust, which is an Eden project partner. And we're going to look at discussing physical design, but also thinking about the accessibility chain. That concept that we really began to hear about from our other speakers of joined up thinking, connecting the dots to create a truly accessible and inclusive experience. And I can think of nobody better than to discuss that than the Eden Project. And Jane, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. And I'd like to thank Sazol and Accessibility Qatar and the organisers of this conference for inviting me here today, and for your kind hospitality since I arrived in Doha. Really, my first impressions, this is my first visit to Qatar, and my impressions couldn't be more positive, really. And I'd also like to thank you for your fabulous weather. My plan really is for my 3 days in Doha to soak up enough of your amazing sunshine and temperature to last me for my whole English summer, which, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, will be much cooler than here. So today I'm very pleased to be talking to you about Eden Project as a case study. I'm actually wearing two hats. One is in my role as director of the Sensory Trust, which is an organisation that works very closely with Eden. But also I was part of the original development team that created Eden Project back in the days when nobody believed actually it could happen. And very, very pleased to see how successfully the Eden Project has grown over that time. So to start with, I just want to give you a little bit of context about the Sensory Trust and what we do. We're a UK organisation. Our whole focus is on inclusive design and making places accessible and engaging for all different people, all different ages and all abilities, as we were just discussing before the break. How we do this? Well, we really position ourselves where we believe that there are a lot of people now that really want these things to happen. But I think what that immediately turns into a question of, well, how do you actually make that happen in practice? So we focus a lot on producing guidance and on tools that help development teams, that helps design teams with the tools that they can use to put these inclusive design principles into practice. We also get involved hands-on with going to sites and running access reviews, and we work very closely with different projects and organisations, particularly around the UK and sometimes in partnership around the world. And we work with a whole range of different types of places. So sometimes it's public open space, sometimes it's big visitor destinations like Eden, but it can be schools and hospitals and really quite a wide range of places. And we also advise on sensory design as a way of looking at how the actual experience that people get when they go somewhere can be great for everybody, but it can be particularly great for people who quite often get missed out of the picture. And what we talk about as an overriding aspiration really is that we feel what we're doing is aiming to create an equality of experience. And what's really important with that is that this isn't the same as saying that you create the same experience for everybody. But what we are aiming to do is that whatever goes on in a certain place, a certain destination, there's all the ingredients of a visit add up to be equally great regardless of who you are. And they might be different ingredients, but at the end of that visit, everybody feels like they've had a great time. Where we're based, we're at the very far southwest corner of the UK. We are proud of having some of the worst weather in the UK. We have a lot of rain, which means that we have a lot of days when, it's not really the most attractive weather to be bringing the tourists in. But actually, fortunately, we have a lot of very positive features that make it very popular as a tourist destination. We have a lot of beaches, we have a lot of very beautiful landscape, a lot of heritage. But it also is one of the poorest areas in the UK. We had a very thriving mining industry that has largely finished. And so we have a lot of disadvantage. So one of the reasons for Eden Project happening in that region was as a regeneration and bringing prosperity both economically and socially into the area. So this is the Eden Project. For anyone who isn't familiar with it, it's one of the best-known visitor destinations in the UK. It's now become very well known across the world. And the aspiration of Eden was to create these enormous biomes. These are giant plastic greenhouses. One of them has a rainforest. One of them carries the Mediterranean environment, and the outdoors is a cool, temperate environment. And the whole idea was to have a place where people could understand our relationship with the natural world. It's now recognized internationally. When it opened in 2001, it was estimated that it would have about 1 million visitors coming through the door. Well, actually, in reality, over 2 million people came. And since then, it's had visits by over 15 million visitors. Eden doesn't have government funding. It's never had government funding. So it's a very interesting model of a capital project because it's been co-funded. It's a social enterprise, and it's been funded by a collection of different types of funding. Part of it was by the Millennium Commission in the UK, but a lot of it had to be sought from things like bank loans. It's quite high risk in that sense, and it's been a very interesting model to look at how you set something up in that way and then make it successful, because Eden has to work in a way where it's economically successful. It doesn't have money that can support it. And Eden and the Sensory Trust have been working together during that time with the aspiration of making it a place that would be welcoming and engaging for all the visitors who wanted to come. And I'm really pleased to say that very recently Eden was awarded the country's best visitor attraction by Visit England as an acknowledgement of really the work that's been going on. And what I want to say today is that I'm not standing here for a minute suggesting that we've resolved everything in this work. I think all of us here, we know this is very much a journey. It's a very complex journey. And what I'm hoping today is that the things I share with you will have some value in resonating with perhaps some of the challenges that you're having. I want to include some things where we know we didn't think hard enough and we're now trying to do something about that, but also it's ongoing and plenty more things that we want to be seeing happen. This is just a quick view of the start of Eden, so you can get a context. The top left picture shows an old China clay quarry in Eden. China clay was the biggest mining material in Cornwall, and this basically is an enormous hole in the ground. And Tim Smith had the vision that it would be a perfect place to create this very impressive visitor destination in this location. Very challenging for all the obvious engineering reasons, challenging because there was no soil there, so all the soil had to be created to grow the plants, and really very challenging because it was quite a multi-layered project that was envisaged. So what happened was that the project got constructed and oh, it's going so well. There we go. Sorry, bear with me. And so it opened in 2001, and in its juvenile form, that's the tropical rainforest when it was just opened. And the reasons why, from the earliest days, there was an aspiration at Eden to be inclusive really came down to some very straightforward points, I think, many of which have been raised already this morning. But I think one of the things was that there was a recognition that actually this is a very ordinary thing. We did a survey at Eden some years ago and asked family groups who were enjoying the place if anybody in the group had a disability or a health issue, and about a third of family groups said, yes, we do. It's there in the mix of people who are coming and enjoying places, and I think what's picking up very strongly from this morning and the discussions that are happening is that one of the aspirations I think we all share is we want to make this very ordinary, so that what we can achieve ultimately is that the way we design places, the way we plan things, we are thinking across the range of different people that we are planning them for, and we're not making special provisions. We're not thinking of this as something different, we're just thinking of it as being part of what we're doing. The second point has already been raised, responding to an aging society across Europe. This is something we are facing, and I think it's interesting because it very often gets portrayed as quite a challenging issue. We're very keen to see it as a very positive issue in the sense that we have a lot of people now. The baby boomers are just coming into retirement years. This is a whole new generation. Their aspirations, their behaviours, everything is going to be different to how it was before. It means volunteer programs will have very different prospects for how we engage people. The things that people want to come to the Eden Project and do, and to the places that you're involved with, will be different, and we need to know what those are, and we need to be responding to it. And as someone's mentioned, in that age group, we have people with more time and more money to be going and visiting places. So we really need to be taking that on board. The third one, setting a new norm. That's a really important one for us. We just want this to be the way that things then happen. And increasingly what we're finding is that funders expect this work to be there, and we have more legislation that is supporting it. One of the things that we've done in the past is we wanted to look at really what the barriers are that are making things difficult in terms of some people enjoying places like Eden. And there has in the past been a big assumption in the UK that this came down to some very blunt ideas about, well, it was ramps, toilets, the usual physical elements. But we knew that it was more complex than that, because we had plenty of places saying to us, we've made all these improvements, but we're still not diversifying our audience, what's going on. So this was the result of a national survey of people with all sorts of different disabilities and asking them what the barriers were. The top one, the biggest response, no surprises, came to be physical barriers. But look at number 2, which is almost as many people saying that the lack of information was an enormous barrier. And that was really important for us to know. And things like people not feeling confident about going somewhere or not feeling perhaps they belong. And what this revealed to us was that there were a whole set of barriers that were impacting people way before they actually went somewhere. And if we didn't address those, then we could make all the improvements we like on site, but we still won't be resolving the whole accessibility issue. So this led to us developing something called the access chain. And I'm delighted to hear different people this morning making references to different chains. This particular one we created because we wanted to help people see that the visitor experience has these very clear different steps involved. So if you're a designer or a planner or a manager, it was really important to know that you have to start thinking earlier than you might think that you do. The first step is people actually deciding to visit. This is often when they're at home, or it might be in a B&B or in a hotel, but it's the point when someone is deciding, does your place look like somewhere that I can go to very closely, or actually preceded by the question of, would I want to? What's actually on offer to me? The second one is the journey and arrival, and really if the journey is too difficult, it might be enough to just make it not worth it. And what's the arrival? What's the welcome when someone arrives somewhere? How do they feel about it? Do they feel like, oh yeah, you expected me to come? Or do they feel like, I'm not sure that really you were planning on me being there? The on-site experience is step 3. So there's 2 whole steps that have been thought about before we get to the questions that relate to the place itself and how that's functioning. Step 3 is always the biggest one because there's so many issues that need to be thought about in the place itself. And then, step 4, I won't bother going back, but step 4 was the point of returning home. And again, another crucial step that easily gets missed, but we have to think about when somebody's leaving a place, what impressions are they taking with them? There was a Visit England survey that showed that people with disabilities often rely on word of mouth much more than other people. So when they leave a place, if they go with a bad impression, they're going to tell other people about it, and that will spread. And increasingly online and with social media, those things have become a much bigger reality for us. The way that we're informed now, I think, has hugely changed. So what I'd like to do is just to spend a few minutes looking at how those different steps of the access chain relate to the way that we've been thinking about the Eden project and how people decide whether to go to Eden and what their experience is. So step 1, the decision to visit and people thinking about whether Eden is the place for them has particularly put the focus on thinking about what can people access online and how can they get information. We've got further to go on this, and actually Accessible Qatar is a fantastic example of what can happen in this area in a really positive way. But we've developed on, if you look at the Eden Project website, there's a wealth of material on there, and we've been working together to make an access guide so that people can find information about specific access issues. And one of the ambitions with that is to get enough information on there to save people having to ring up. The number of places I see where the default position is, oh, just ring us and we'll tell you. And what you end up with is people always having to make extra effort to find out the information. We've also been exploring making the information available in different formats, and this has been helped by a lot of progress with accessible websites generally. But the example that I'm showing in the slide, and this is showing a series of pictograms on the right-hand side, and it's a language called Widget, which was primarily designed for people with learning disabilities who found text actually too complex to use. And this is internationally used now by the company that made Widget. And they've turned it into a software package, so you can actually get it where people can use it as word processor and they can be typing in symbols. But also on a website, the example on the left is where it can be installed where if you hover over certain words, that comes up as symbol language so that people could be exploring a website and getting it translated into symbols. It's just an example of, and there's many other languages that are interesting here, but this is an example of what we've been looking at. Step 2, the actual journey and arrival. Sometimes the journey, like public transport, can be outside the remit of a capital project, but Eden worked very closely with local bus companies to look at what could be done to make it as accessible as possible, and that led to certain new bus routes being created from local train stations. There are wheelchair accessible bus services that operate to and from Eden Project. There's been a lot of focus on things like the car parking, which proved to be not enough in the early days, and so that's been increased, and now there are hundreds of spaces there, and there are drop-off areas that people can easily find. And picking up a point I said earlier, that what do people actually feel when they come into a place like Eden? There's all the practical stuff in place, but really there's an emotional connection that we need to think about as well. So the design of the banners on the left there, this is a series of colourful banners that lead people through a conversation, actually, that starts with "if you believe," and the second one says "there is a place," and then it goes on. And very simple, not many words per banner. But what you find is that actually different people appear on the banners as you walk down the path. This is all very subtle. A lot of people wouldn't pick up on it, but the point of it is that some people will, because some people are very used to going out and about and never seeing images of people that they will relate more strongly with in terms of audiences that are expected to be there. And then on the picture on the right, when you actually enter Eden Project, is putting clear information, easy to find information, making it easy to find the toilets. And also we've developed a scheme called Access Volunteers. This is part of a volunteer program, but it's people trained in techniques that will be particularly useful in supporting people when they visit. And it includes things like sighted guiding. So if somebody wants to come to Eden on their own and they're visually impaired, they could ask for somebody to go with them around site and highlight certain points of interest. And then the next step of the on-site experience, this is what's taken a lot of thought and attention to how people actually get around Eden. You'll appreciate from the earlier slide, it's a big hole in the ground. So we had a lot of challenges to think about with gradients and the fact that people would be traveling from the highest level down to the lowest. But I remember saying that if we could make somewhere like Eden accessible, then we can pretty much do it anywhere. And some of the early things we did, the picture on the right is showing a series of different types of surfaces that could be used as path materials. This is something we did with the architects before the site opened and tried them out. So there were different ideas for what could be used. It's interesting to think, actually, with 17 years on, what we'd be having here is a lot more materials probably that use recyclates, so recycled materials in the surfaces and then testing those out. But this was really useful in us learning what was going to be workable in the project itself. The picture on the left, top left, is a land train, and this was a transport system that would take people basically from the top of the site, from when they came in from the car parks, and down to the bottom and up again. And at the moment, Eden is exploring the use of electric vehicles, and I think we all have an ambition that it would be nice to see the assisted transport move on to reflect the advances in transport that are happening. And the bottom left there is one of the latest things installed at Eden, which is a canopy walkway. And understanding that whoever you are coming to Eden, going high up through the canopy in the rainforest may well be attractive, and it should be there as a opportunity for anybody. We've also, about 6 years ago, we installed a changing places facility. This is a larger toilet space and changing space that is particularly valued by families with children with profound and multiple disabilities who need more space to be changing. And it has a profound impact on the type of visit that they can make. Very often they can only visit for a couple of hours, but if a facility like this is in place, then they can come for the whole day because the facility has hoists and changing tables and sinks and wash facilities. And one thing I want to point out here is we wanted to make it look great. So it's bright orange and it's got pictures in it and it looks nice, because what we find in the UK is when accessible design happens, especially with things like toilets, it can look incredibly special. And we wanted it to just look funky, so that's what we did. We wanted it to be a great space. A lot of attention to detail. This is still ongoing, lots of detail we pick up on, but we're going around and checking things like counter heights. When there's a new cafe space put in, have we got the counter heights right? Is it going to be easy for people to be using? Have we got hearing loops installed? This is the shop actually at Eden. And the hearing loop was installed, but it wasn't working. Nobody knew because it hadn't been tested. So it got tested, and we're on top of that now. The one on the right is a more subtle detail. These backlit plants in the displays here were actually put in because if you have most people obviously with visual impairments have some degree of sight, and so can pick up stronger contrast, and we wanted to put some things in that were really there for them. And helping people get around. Maps are incredibly complex. Very, very difficult to find maps that work for everybody. I'm sure everybody in this room will have different ways of using maps. I know I'm pretty much different to almost everybody probably in this room in the way that I use maps, so I'm quite good at testing them. But this is the main map at Eden, and it clearly shows in yellow a main accessible route. It doesn't mean it's the only route people can use, but it's to give people a clue of where they can go. One of the big issues we think that there is for people coming to somewhere like Eden is that very often people come with a limited amount of energy. Now this relates back to the slide that showed who the majority of people are who experience barriers, because the majority of people who experience barriers actually are people who perhaps can't walk so well and maybe have a health issue that just lowers their stamina. So it's a bit like a car coming with a quarter tank of fuel and thinking the last thing you want to do is to be driving off on roads that waste your time and waste your fuel, because when you've gone down all your dead ends and found your way, eventually you'll virtually be out of fuel, and that's your visit. So we want to get people to where they want to go as easily as they can get there. We look at the information a lot and think about different ways that people can access the information. We have about 7 million people out of a population of about 60 in the UK who don't have basic literacy skills for whatever reason. That's a lot of people coming who won't be able to read the text that's put in front of them. And if we add to that people who can't see the text because of visual impairments and other issues, then it exaggerates the importance of putting our information in different ways. Just talking about the text for a minute, one thing we do a lot is to put things into cartoons, pictures, diagrams, things that people can pick up without using the text. On the bottom left, this is a sign in the biome. On the bottom left, there's a series of widget symbols. And we decided with the widget symbols that we didn't want it to be seen as a special language for only the people that would use widget normally, and to be given separately to people arriving. So we put it through the signage to see what happened. And what we found was we got a really good response from people, for example, with very small children who were only just starting to learn text. And they were using the symbols to get more idea of what was going on, and they could be quite fascinated by them. We also found it was very helpful for people who didn't have English as a first language. Oh, sorry, and just on that point, when we asked for feedback from families who were visiting, and someone in the family had a learning disability, and the feedback we got was, well, it was great, actually. We really enjoyed finding the information. We could have access to it. But you know, the biggest thing it did for us is we knew you expected us to be there. And that is what we then understood was so important, was giving people, not just making this stuff there, not just making it accessible, but making sure that people knew that that had been thought about. The actual experiences on offer really go side by side with the accessibility considerations. So what is it that people can actually have access to? And is that going to be really interesting? So if you arrive at the Eden Project and your primary sense of sight isn't the one you're using to get around, or you're not using hearing, what do those different experiences add up to? And is it going to be something great? So we put a lot of emphasis on different sensory experiences. We also think a lot about, if people are adrenaline seekers, well, getting on the zip wire that goes all the way across the Eden site will be very attractive. So we've been working with the people who run the zip wire to make sure that different people can have access to that. And I mentioned the canopy walkway, and these misters have been put through one of the routes that take you up there to add an extra dimension, so people can actually immerse themselves in the incredible misty humidity of a rainforest. And then finally, the point of where people are leaving Eden. And this was a problem actually in the early days, because it's a very tiring site, and it was a climb to get back up to people's cars. So this has had a lot more thought, assisted transport, making it clearer with the visitor information, actually where people's cars are parked, where do they catch the bus. And this also relates to some of the relationships that we've been building at Eden, because I think whatever the destination is, usually, as well as being a tourist destination, there's a very strong role to play with the local community. And Eden has become a very important place for groups coming from the local area and getting value from visits to the place. And they also then help become advocates for Eden when they go back out. This is actually a group of people who share a problem with respiratory disease between them. With respiratory disease, very often you lose confidence very quickly about being physically active, because it can become very scary. So these people have come to Eden to be part of a walking group, and they gain confidence through doing that at Eden. And then they can use that on a regular basis, and it's now become a part of a health promotion scheme. And the sort of messages that people that are shared with people as they leave Eden, things that are going to suggest to people more ways that they can get involved, and helping to encourage people to leave with a very positive sense of their visit. So what I want to move on to now is really picking one of the specific building projects that's happened at Eden. And this was really, if I'm honest, this was the first chance we had to look at how do you stitch in an inclusive approach into a capital build. Because when the whole Eden project started in 2001, the whole thinking on inclusive design wasn't where it has now moved to. And so by the time this building got planned, we were in a very different place, and we had a chance to think, okay, how would we do it? How are we going to do it now? How do we learn from what we did the first time? This is an education centre in the centre of the Eden visitor experience, and it's got a copper roof, and it's a 3-story building. It doesn't show it particularly from the slide, but it is actually a 3-story building. And the idea of the core was to build a building fitting in with the theme of Eden Project. It was to build a building that was modelled on a tree. So the canopy was the roof, and the roots were the floor, and then the centre were the lifts that took people between the floors. And of particular relevance today, the idea was to go for the best standards we could at the time in sustainable design and look at what did that mean. And what was important at that point was a lot of the work in sustainable design in the UK then really focused on environmental considerations and economic considerations. But the social elements tended not to be considered quite so strongly. So what we were ending up with quite often was buildings that might fit a lot of environmental criteria, but actually they weren't necessarily the best fit for how the buildings were going to be used. And the best example I can give is, without naming names of a famous building that's been done in the UK, but there was a building in London that was made where the whole environmental strategy was based on not opening the windows. The building would decide, actually, if you were too warm, and it would open the windows. So all fine in the plans, the staff move into this building, first sunny day, we get very excited, obviously, in England when there's any sun. So the first sunny day, and as an English person, what you do is you go and open the window. And the whole environmental strategy went out the window, literally. Because we hadn't thought enough, they hadn't thought enough about how do people behave and think about that and then design things that fit. So with the core, what we wanted to do was to think about the social and to build the inclusive design in as a really important element of what was happening. And as a result of that, what we did with Eden was to develop something called the Social Sustainability Toolkit. And the ingredients of the toolkit probably won't surprise people that much, but what's important here was what we have come to realize is how important it is for design teams and development teams to have clear techniques, tools that they can actually use that are straightforward and fit with the usual processes where you're planning things and designing things. Because if you design things that are outside those processes, they're at real risk of just being forgotten and left out. So what we did, on the left-hand side, there's a list of the things you'd expect to find and all the considerations of making a capital project. So what's going to happen to the waste? How do we minimize the energy use? Health and safety concerns, what's it going to cost? And how do we make it most cost-effective? And in the list is inclusive design. And on the right-hand side, we have the different design phase, the design phase, we have a construction phase, and we have the occupation of the building. And what we also knew was that we had to have inclusive design in all those stages, because if it only goes in the design, when it comes to the project being built, so many things get built in a different way. So on the left, really, that's what I'm saying. There were the three elements of sustainable design: the social, environmental, and economic, and it was about bringing all of those to the table. And on the right, it was recognizing who the key areas were that we needed to work with. So there was the client and the designer and the contractor. And the way that we did this in the planning and design of the building, we created an inclusive design brief. That proved to be really important. That's actually what identified the aspirations for the project, what the design was going to achieve. We also we reviewed existing buildings, and we looked at what had worked well and what hadn't worked well, so that we could learn from previous things that had happened at Eden and elsewhere. The third thing on the list, targets, probably proved to be one of the most important things. We wanted some clear goals that we were going to achieve with this building. One of those targets was to have no inaccessible emergency exits from this building. 3-story building, and we wanted everybody to be able to get out on every level along with everybody else, and I'll come back to that. We created access statements. This is something as part of our planning system in the UK, and access appraisals, and close working with all members of the design team was really important, as is the last one, and this relates to having no inaccessible emergency exits, because that could only come about if we had the landscape team working really closely with the architecture team. And very often we find they get separated, and I don't know if that happens here, but that was really important. So we identified criteria for the inclusive design, like I'm saying, and also points of reference for those standards that would be achieved. Using some of the legislation, and where there wasn't legislation, we used best practice guidance so that the design team had something to refer to. And what we achieved by that, and it's hard to make it out really from any images I could find, but the landscape architect actually modelled the ground around the building in a kind of spiral, so that wherever you are in the building, you can get out of it at ground level. Now, that proved to be really important for any emergency egress, but it also proved to be incredibly important when the lift broke down in the building, which it has on occasions, and then people could actually access the different levels by going out and getting back in again. And this was one of the buildings at Eden that we learnt from. And I'm sorry about the quality of the photo, it's not the best one, but if you can look at the end of the building and on the left-hand side, that's the emergency exit there. And this is what the legislation in the UK says you can do, and this is fine, that if you're a wheelchair user, you would come out onto that metal platform. Everybody else would go down the stairs and leave, and then there is a different procedure for the wheelchair user who's on the platform. But if you look at where the cars are parked, what you'll notice is that actually, in effect, what you do is you come out the exit, you go down the stairs, you come back up the stairs, and you're on the level with the cars. So when we stood and looked at this with the architect and said, why didn't you just bridge it? And to their credit, they just said, hands up, sorry, we just didn't think, we just fell into a standard practice. But what happened from this was that the people working at Eden, when there was a fire practice, they said, we don't like this. This is not how we want to do things. We want to be better than this. So when we did the core, we decided that we wouldn't do this again, and that's why it became a target for the new building. Acoustic detailing was another detail that we had a clear target for. In the cafe spaces at Eden, we were finding that the acoustics actually were very difficult for anybody with a hearing impairment, because a lot of the noise that bounced around. And I have to say how impressed I am in this building, actually, with the acoustic design. It's a very good sound in this building. And so in the core, it was a big aspiration. In the roof detail, there, you can just see the start of the panels going in. These are acoustic baffles that were put in to absorb the sound in these very big open spaces. And it's made it a very comfortable building for people to be using. We also looked at post-design reviews. We wanted to know how the building was working for different people, so we went around the building with all sorts of different people. And the next thing that happened with the core was that there was an outdoor space that was created, a learning garden, where people could go outside and enjoy the space. And to make the garden happen, I think some of you might know Jane Knight, actually, from the Eden Project, landscape architect there. She's been here before, I think. But anyway, we worked closely with Jane and invited people with all sorts of different disabilities and perspectives to come together and just talk to us about what a garden space would mean to them, what sort of ingredients they would most like to have. And that then informed the creation of this multisensory space that was put into effect. We also spent a lot of time with training, and training's been important throughout Eden, and I know it's been mentioned already, the importance of making sure that people understand if they are frontline staff, for example, in a visitor destination. But here I just want to pick up training of the construction team, because what we did was we spent effort actually working with the guys that would be on site making the building happen, to explain why the details were in place. For example, the handrail detail that you can see on the right there with the tactile indicators for people with visual impairments. We wanted them to know why these things were being built. And interestingly, what happened as a result was a few weeks after we'd gone through all the training, and we were getting phone calls from the guys that were working on the toilets in the core. And they were ringing us up and saying, I just want to check with you. we're putting in a handrail and we're not sure it's the right height. Could you just pop over and have a look? And what that meant was that we had people who were actually on site. This was post-design. These were the people who were actually installing, and if there were things that hadn't been detailed quite right, they were then there paying attention, and it made a lot of difference. I think a big lesson from how we've worked on the core was the importance of getting in right at the start of when the building was being conceived. This table just simply shows something that is very obvious in a way, but it's the increase in cost the longer you leave it in the development and design phases to think about inclusive design. So the longer you leave it, the more expensive it becomes to be then making changes to what people are planning. If we hadn't thought about it at that concept stage, we would never have got the landscape and the building working together. What we'd have had was a set of landscape grades outside and a building that then had to do its best. But we'd have been in the world of making ramps and compromises that we didn't want to be in. So the critical ingredients, I think, from having done the core was the training for the design team, but particularly picking up all the people that were engaged and the construction team as part of that. Working closely with disabled people in its widest sense also was really important, because then we're talking about people who really know firsthand what the sorts of issues are, and we're constantly finding out new perspectives on what things can be helpful and what things can be really not helpful. Inclusive from the earlier stages, and having really clear targets that the teams can understand are the aspirations. Another example I just quickly want to look at is some of the events program at Eden and making those inclusive, because this is from the summer music sessions at Eden. Now, every summer, the site gets turned into a stage, not the whole site, sorry, in the middle of the site, there's a big stage for really well-known bands now to come and perform at Eden Project. So we have audiences now of up to 10,000 people who come in and enjoy the music. And it was quite a challenge, actually, to think about how do you make this comfortable and exciting and accessible for all different people. And the view from the top right is a viewing platform that generally gets increased every year as more people are coming to enjoy the music. It's there primarily for people using wheelchairs and their guests. But one thing I wanted to pick up, we consulted with a lot of different people, and we had a young guy in his 20s who'd lost his hearing, and he came to hear the music, to appreciate the music, and he had a half-empty water bottle. And he said, and in the warm-up music, he was feeling, through his water bottle, he could feel the rhythm of the music. And he suddenly said, "It's The Cure, that's my favourite band." And we said, "How do you know that?" And he said, I could feel, and he knew the music so well, he could actually. So from that, we got ideas of making hearing balloons, which are very ordinary, just a balloon. But we made these available for people coming to the session, so they had something they could actually hold and feel the music. And that's something that we're keen to progress on to other ideas. We've also been planning relaxed sessions as part of the events program. Dinosaurs have been very big at Eden. I think dinosaurs have been quite big around the world, actually, for the last few years. But we've had a dinosaur program. But being dinosaurs, they're huge, and they're very scary, and they're very noisy. And for some children, and particularly children with autism, they can be terrifying. So what we've done is Eden's a very busy place. You know, we can get 10, 15,000 people there in a day. So what we've done is we open the site earlier than normal, and it's just for families with children who appreciate a chance to explore this more quietly. We raise the lighting slightly so it's not quite so scary. They can take it at their own pace. There's more staff to help, and they can touch the dinosaurs. They can just enjoy it at a quieter time, and that's proved to be really really great, actually, and we're now extending that to all the events program at Eden. So just summarising on what the benefits we can see of some of the primary benefits from having done this work at Eden. I think just generally widening the visitor appeal, and I'm not going to go through all the background reasons to that because we've had a lot of that this morning in a really fantastic way. But what it's resulted in is more people coming to Eden, more people believing it's a place for them, and more people actually enjoying it when they do. And that is all part of making it a successful visitor destination. It's been more cost effective. I think there's sometimes a misunderstanding about inclusive design that it's going to cost more. Usually it only costs more because it doesn't get thought about. And then it comes to a stage where people think about it and they have to do all sorts of things to try and deal with it, which are expensive because they're additional to the original design. If it gets stitched in early enough, it will be cost effective and it will be better. It will just create a better design. And then the positive profile, this has been interesting at Eden actually, and we've been picking up generally over time how the general public has responded to the fact that Eden is making this level of effort. And we're finding that people on the whole are just really positive about that and love the fact that you've got a project that is welcoming in everybody. And so just on what I think the key ingredients are, integrating it into early stages and all the different stages as you go through. A creative approach, this is something that I think inclusive design actually lends itself to thinking in more interesting ways about how you design something. If you're thinking about somebody who's not going to be experiencing something just through sight, for example, it is a more interesting challenge. It really gets you thinking about how your buildings can perform. And making it collaborative, so working with lots of different people to get a great mix of perspectives to help doing things differently. What we're finding at Eden is that there's a lot of focus actually there on real hands-on experiences. There's not a lot of digital and virtual reality at the moment. And what we're finding is that there are quite a lot of people who are really welcoming that because they're finding it different to some other places that they're going to. And I think part of this is about understanding where we're all, perhaps in an industry where we're always trying to find things that really connect with people and resonate with people. And that's something at this project that I've seen really does resonate with people. They like the authenticity of going somewhere that's like that. And I would like to finish by simply inviting you all to come. I apologize in advance for the weather, but apart from that, I can promise you would have a very interesting visit. And if you'd like to come, or if you'd simply like to get in touch, that's our website at the Sensory Trust, and there's a website at the Eden Project, and do feel free to follow up on this today. And thank you again for inviting me. Thank you. Left a bit of time.
We do. Don't go anywhere, Jane. Yeah, you come this side. Yes, we've got a little bit of time for a few questions. I would mention to Jane one thing. Having worked in Qatar for 6 years, Qatari friends, they would say they would go to London for their holiday, and I'd say, oh, what was it like? Did you enjoy it? I said, oh, it was wonderful. It rained every day. And I'm going, oh, it must have been, oh, it was wonderful. So, different things appeal to different people. But a chance to ask Jane a few questions or some comments whilst we've got Jane with us. I think you've stunned them into silence. No questions?
There's one here.
One here, okay. Do we have a microphone for the front? Thank you.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation. My name is Abdullah Abdulaziz. I'm a responsible tourism activist. I've come from Bahrain, and I think it's an eye-opening presentation. The whole project, accessible tourism, accessible Qatar, is an initiative is a continuous sustaining CSR initiatives. Looking at Sensory Trust, the name itself it's a self-explanatory, but I would like to know whether have you covered transportation sectors or not, or you're working with only buildings,
Other sector as a Sensory Trust.
such as airports and other facilities.
We have actually worked on a wide range. So we've worked on an airport development at Stansted Airport, where we worked with Grimshaw Architects, and we helped them address the inclusive design aspects of that. A lot of our work actually is outdoor environments. Sorry, is this? Yeah. So very often we're looking at public realm, public open space as well.
Did you tackle also the wayfinding within the airport terminal?
Yes, we were looking at that as well. In fact, that was quite a big consideration for what we were helping with.
Thank you very much.
I remember a few years ago here in Qatar, talking to the foundation, and at the time they were thinking of designing a Quranic garden in Education City, which sounded like a really nice idea. And I don't think the garden ever got finished, but we tried to take some of the principles, the sort of thing that we're talking about in the Sensory Trust, and applying them in terms of how the Quranic garden could represent the different themes, not just through the plants, but through the smells, the things you touch, the things you could even taste and mix together. And it was a shame it didn't happen, but it did take that little degree of creativity from the people involved to think it's not going to be just something you look at, but something you engage with. Any other questions or thoughts? I think the fact there is food and drink waiting. Oh, one, sorry, Makta.
Thank you. Jane is a wonderful project, as I see from A to Z. All the changes, the chains are there, and you look to most of universal design, accessibility rules to be implemented in such a project. And you are working in a very difficult environment. It was not an easy flat as we have here in the Gulf. When we create a garden, it's completely flat. So the site itself is a unique site, and working with universal accessibility is something really not easy and an easy task. Since the project now is functioning, are you planning to create similar projects around the world? Anybody gave you the initiative to start another Aiden somewhere in the world? Thank you.
Yes, there is. There's a series of projects now under development in different parts of the world with the Eden Project. For example, there's one happening at the moment in China. There are plans in New Zealand and Canada and many different places actually. So that is a big next step with Eden. There will be other. They won't be exactly the same, but they will be built in the spirit of Eden Project.
I would love to see. How many of you have been to the Singing Sand Dunes here in Doha, in Qatar? Now, wouldn't you just like to turn Jane and the Sensory Trust team over to the Singing Sand Dunes and say, what do you do with this? And if you don't know the Singing Sand Dunes, okay, I think there are 12 places in the world where the sand dunes sing. And what they do is, I'm trying to think of a nice way to put it, you sit at the top of the dune and you go down it on your bottom. And as you go down, it hums. So the more people you've got going down the dunes at once, it goes hum. Very strange experience. But as a multi-sensory experience, I'm sure the Sensory Trust could do something very interesting. It'd be fascinating to push people down in wheelchairs and see what happens. Well, exciting. One last question I think we have time for. So with that thought of the singing sand dunes in mind, we'll close off. I'm just going to finish off. First of all, can we just say our thanks to Jane for a very interesting and important presentation. We're going to summarise and finish off now. One thing I wanted to mention, because Jane pointed out the use of the widget symbols at Eden. For those people who aren't aware, there is a symbol set very similar to the widget symbols that is designed around Arabic language and local culture and values. It's called Tawasul. It's free to use and free to distribute. So do please, if you're thinking about drawing upon that part of what Jane said, there are a set of symbols there which are open for you to use. I think what struck me listening today was the issue of joined up thinking. That actually to create accessible experience for all, everybody had a part to play. And if somebody in the chain, as Jane showed us, didn't perform their part, the accessible experience didn't happen. It was broken. So that coordinating role, that monitoring role, that enforcement role, if necessary, is actually really important. As we say, there's a saying in England, we say, the devil is in the detail. And you can see how little things, like your fire exit, make a difference. That three-tier idea, joining people together for safe exit, is a really good example of how detail makes a difference. Planning was discussed several times in the session. And I liked the idea of throwing away action plans and access plans. And making the point really, and I know that we said we don't really mean it, but what we do mean is that planning is a process. It's about your thinking and your decision making, not about a document that is then kept in a glass cabinet for you to work to from there. Because the one thing we know about real life is what happens when plans are being implemented. So whilst we're trying to follow a plan, everything else is moving around us. We need to plan, to implement, to monitor, to evaluate, and plan again on a constant cycle. Probably our biggest single problem in making things accessible is people. The things that will most break that cycle of all your planning and thinking is what people do to what you've put in place. It is the person who puts out the flower pots across the fire exit. It's the person who parks the car in the disabled bays across all of your disabled bays. It is the person who breaks the handrail in the toilet, and so on and so on. People are challenged, and that requires us to constantly be looking, and to be looking through the eyes of people who need and depend on these resources. I want to really close by thanking everybody from Sasol for putting this event on, the sponsors and partners. It is a really important event, and I think we've learned a great deal. Accessible tourism, accessible environments, build capacity within the country. They support our education. Is there anything better or stronger, or one of the elements if you're going to study Islamic studies here than going to the Museum of Islamic Art and seeing the representations? It supports employment opportunities for people with disabilities. Many people can work within the travel and tourism industry. It creates opportunities for innovation. Jane made the point about the problems of maps at the Eden Project. So it sets us a challenge. If it's difficult to find accessible maps, what do we do? Maybe maps aren't the answer. What's the problem we face and how might we fix it? And it might be that wayfinding systems, audio systems and so on are part of the answer, rather than trying to simply build maps. What I've taken away as well is that here in Qatar, you need to build upon your strengths. Customer support culture, customer service culture is very, very strong in Qatar. Every time you go to a restaurant, to a hotel, people support you. People are there to assist. That is part of our broad expectations and the culture we have in the country. And we can build upon that. We don't need to replace it. And I think understanding what we do well is as important as setting the new challenges for what we can do better. So I want to finish off just with one short story, and it's about people and how people do the strangest things despite all your planning and your training. And it's about that chaining of experience and what happens when the link's broken. Because we live in an era of social media. When things go wrong, everybody knows about it. Just ask United Airlines about social media. They've got a lot to say about it at the moment. The chaining experience. I had a friend come over here to Qatar, and he had a neurological condition, which meant he had a lot of shake in his body. He was very unsteady on his feet. He tired easily, and so on. But he said, I had a great stay. It was really good. He said, I came to Qatar, went through the airport, went to the hotel, went to see things. People helped me. If I was tired, I was somewhere I could sit, and so on. I said, that's interesting. You had a great stay. I said, yeah. You didn't say that on Twitter, did you? He said, no. I said, what did you say about your visit? He said, well, what I mentioned was that when I got on the plane to leave, the cabin crew came up to me. They helped me. They got me into my seat. And they said, oh, you have special needs. I've taken your menu away. Here's a Braille menu. And he said to me, I'm not blind. I've got shake. And the cabin crew obviously thought, we have a person with a disability. What do we do for people with disabilities? We give them the Braille menu. He doesn't read Braille. All of a sudden, he said, it got worse. So what was he telling everybody about on Twitter? Not about the rest spaces he'd used, not about the accessible hotels. He said, you won't believe what they did on the plane on the way back home. And that's the challenge we face. The devil is in the detail. It's the little things that people remember. So if we're going to make big change, we have to think about the tiny things. So the good news is you get fed, and there's lunch, which is over here on the left. And to finish off, can you, once again, one last round of applause for everybody from Sasol, from our speakers. Thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you later. Oh, one other thing. There is this afternoon, there is a media workshop on the role of communication in promoting accessibility. Just spoken, and there is some space. If anybody would like to stay on to that workshop, they are very, very welcome as well. Thank you very much again.